Have you heard about the Flightless bird by SeaSkate on ao3? It was a week before everything shifted that Bruce called for a meeting in the Batcave after patrol one night. The occurrence of that in of itself wasn't entirely uncommon since the man's return. Something about almost losing everyone made the man want them all closer to him than ever, but it was rare when it was a required meeting. Most times if it was just a monthly meeting it ended up just amounting to a check-in of sorts for everyone. Boring, but sometimes useful when two people talk of cases far too similar in some aspects and learn that they might be connected. If it was one of those meetings, then if something more pressing was occurring around the same time, B wouldn't be happy about it, but skipping was allowed. The city came first after all. It was that sort of excuse that allowed Tim to skip most of the meetings, and Jason to skip practically all of them by just aligning their schedules well enough. Today was not one of those meetings. They were all sitting at a long table with chairs wrapped around it in a U shape, as the other head of the table was taken by a projector and a screen. Usually it was used as an almost sort of show and tell for their cases, but tonight the setup wasn't turned on and the lights weren't even dimmed when all of the bats walked into the cave. It wasn't often that they had missions or cases with no sort of images to go on. Tim watched as everyone sat down, the teen himself taking a seat near the projector, far away from where Batman, Nightwing, and Robin took the seats at the head of the table. He didn't need Bruce's cold stare right now, or Dick's attempts at redemption. Surprisingly, the demon brat had been okay since he came back for good, the kid having mellowed out since meeting John and making some friends on an island. That, and the addition of a new kid to the bunch. Duke sat to the side of Damien, Bruce wanting to keep the two youngest and newest bats to the game close during true meetings. Though, Tim wasn't entirely sure why Bruce had dragged Signal here for this if the meeting was going to be about what he thought. Not that he didn't think that the kid was bloody insane. A lot of the other bats thought that the younger teen was still wearing training wheels since he was on the day shift, but that just meant that he was going after the Rouges while they were still eating their morning cereal. Add that to the Robin gang that the kid was in, and Tim saw plenty of insanity in the kid. But at the end of the day, Signal was a daytime hero and there was no reason for Bruce to be keeping the kid up, waking him up, just for something that he likely won't be involved in. The kid still had school to go to. So did the demon brat, but the kid was actually used to their shitty schedules, unlike Duke whose head was plopped on the table and sounded a bit like he was auditioning to be a zombie extra when anyone asked him anything. Steph was on the other side of Dick, with Cass sitting between her and Tim at the table, as Jason sat across from Tim on the other side of the long table. All the kids in one place. Steph leaned back at the table to glance at Tim, a brow raised in question, but the third Robin only shrugged, keeping his body language as confused and ignorant as possible. He wasn't sure how well he managed it with the pinched sort of look that Cass gave him, as if he was a particularly strange case, but it was good enough to fool Spoiler for the time being. Jason had the same sort of pinched look in his own eyes when Tim turned back to look at him. The third Robin only kicked the second one under the table to wipe the look off the man's face. He and Jason had been getting along well since Tim lost the title of Robin, not that things between them were ever as horrible as the other bats seemed to think. It was hard to be afraid of someone that came to fight him in the atrocity that was the original Robin uniform, fitted for a grown man. Harder still when the next time that Tim saw the guy, he kicked him in the balls. That, among other things, evened them out since they first met. He knew that wouldn't end after everyone knew. If anything, he, Jason and Damien would likely get along better, but that didn't mean that he wanted the other man to know the truth now. "Alright, B," Steph says, seemingly sure that either Tim knew nothing, or, the more likely and correct, knew everything but was refusing to spill. "What's this about?" "Yeah, old man," Jason added, his voice sounded gravely and annoyed without the modulator, "you called us all in here after patrol, bastard. I have a bed waiting for me. Has my name on it and everything." "What?" Tim asked, looking at his predecessor. "Did you get a custom gravestone made?" Jason only looked at him. "Shit, really?" he asked. "Nice." Neither missed the thinly veiled looks of horror coming from certain parts of the table, but they ignored them still. Sometimes Tim wondered if one of the reasons that Jason seemed to tolerate him and lately Steph as well more than the other bats was in part because he wasn't afraid of the man's death in the way that the others seemed to dance around it. Sometimes he wondered what the older vigilante would think if he knew of the lengths that Tim had gone to try and bring those lost to him back. He probably wouldn't feel the same ease. Bruce looked as if he wanted to say something about their conversation, and it was because of that gaze that Tim knew that the words that came out of the man's mouth next were forced from self-restraint. "Everyone needs to clear up space for next Friday's patrol," the man says, his voice devoid of anything at all. "We won't be doing the standard routes that day." "Why?" Dick asked, just as in the dark of the situation as most of those within the room. Bruce looked as if he didn't want to answer. He did so anyways. Ra's al Ghul has asked for us specifically to mediate a meeting between the high-ranking members of the League of Assassins that is to be held in Gotham that day for reasons yet unknown to us. The answer was simple, flat, giving only the baseline of information, all of the facts and yet nothing at all. For the first time, Tim didn't think that the lack of information was intentional. At least not on Bruce's side. "Why are we agreeing to do this?" Steph asks, leaning forwards in her chair to look at the eldest detective better. The League isn't exactly an alley in the standard sense. Tim could see Damien's brows pinching from where he sat, the child torn between scolding Spoiler for questioning Batman, and wanting to do the very thing himself. His silence told of which was more important to him just then. Bruce doesn't seem to mind the question, as if he had been asking it himself ever since agreeing. "It'll be a good way to gather intel on the League and their operations," the man answers, as if reciting from a text that he had to write for himself to explain away just how poor an idea this was. "It will also allow us to find out their reasonings for coming to Gotham, or even stateside, at all for such a meeting that could have been held in the Cradle." Tim knew that it likely couldn't have been held there. Not even the League of Assassins could rebuild such a base fast enough after all of the damage that he had done. Besides, Bruce continues, Ra's said that there will be a new player there that night joining the meeting. The effect of his words was immediate, unease rippling through the room at the idea of a player unknown even to the bats themselves. It wasn't very often that such a thing occurred. Needless to say, there were no more hold-ups from the room about going that night, as Bruce talked through strategies and concrete plans. Tim listened to it all with an unnoticed amount of detachment though. He already knew about the meeting after all, had for a while now, since he was a part of it. When the day of the meeting comes, its oracle, the birds of prey, and signal that tend to Gotham as the bats find themselves hiding up within the rafters of an abandoned warehouse like their namesake. Hidden among the darkness and metal there, they are all close enough to step in if needed, but far enough away to give the illusion of privacy to those below, even as all within the warehouse know that the bats would still be able to hear nearly every word. They were all there, each of them except for Tim. Except for Red Robin. No one had heard from the third Robin all night. Kaz can see the concern in the form of each of the other bats, from those openly showing it like Steph, to those hiding it tightly away but being betrayed by their straying gazes like Dammy. Kaz was concerned too, had been for a week now, ever since the initial meeting when Tim had seemed to know far too much without ever saying a word. He had not needed to do so when Cass was in the room. She had wanted to speak to her little brother on the topic after, but he was as slippery as the shadows themselves when he wanted to be, and he had wanted to be then. Now it was too late to ask anything at all. No one else has the time to even ask after the missing vigilante because the doors are opening, and they all refuse to make a sound as the assassins walk into the room. Ra's al Ghul was the first to enter, coming in through one door and letting it close loudly behind him even as he walked as silent as a ghost. The man was dressed in fine clothing in a shade of green just slightly darker than what the man usually favored. It took Jason a moment to place the color, the conversation around it only having occurred in passing once, but when he did he realized that it was Tim's favorite color. Tim's favorite color was green, and now the very shade of it that the teen liked most was adorning the demon's head skin. Something twisted in the former League assassin's stomach at such a realization, almost more so when he knew that Tim was not there among them where he could see the other Robin. Next to enter the warehouse, though from a different door, was Talia al Ghul. Her entrance was much more subtle as the immortal woman walked in, her steps silent as those that she had slain now were as they rotted in the ground. The assassin was dressed in green and silver across her caramel skin, her face having not aged a day in more than 100 or so years. 3 bodies in the rafters went still as they saw the woman, each for a different reason among them. They didn't have much time to spiral though as another walked into the warehouse through a different door still. Lady Shiva. Unlike the other 2, Lady Shiva was dressed in a deep red and black, colors the same shade as those that both Jason and Tim had worn for some time now. This time it was Cass's turn to go stiff at the sight beneath them. The 3 assassins, 3 of the highest-ranking members of the League, its leader, his daughter, and his right hand, met in the middle of the room, the 3 forming a loose circle that looks as if it was meant for 4, one place being left open in the space across from Ra's al Ghul as the 3 stood next to a whiteboard that had been brought in just for this. The bats watched, finding the arrangement more than a little strange as the 3 stood silently together below. The 3 did not say a word then, not to one another, and not to any of the bats that they all knew were watching from above. None of them greeted one another in any way, all 3 of them seemingly stuck in a form of waiting. Waiting for the 4th to join them, the wild card that the bats did not know. No one says a thing until a new face joins the mix. Every head in the room turned as the 4th and final door of the warehouse opened, and 2 figures stepped through it. One was someone that a few of the bats recognized from a few months before when Ra's had followed Tim to Gotham for reasons that they still did not know. The assassin was a bald woman that looked only a small handful of years older than most of the teen bats. She had a bag slung over her shoulder, and was dressed in more casual clothing than Damien or Bruce had ever seen worn in the presence of Ra's al Ghul, ripped jeans and all. The girl, Prusum in the rafters knew her name to be, looked to her companion and received a nod in turn for whatever silent conversation passed between the pair. They should be up in the rafters if you wish to join them, the second person said, their voice seemingly devoid of anything at all, but Prue knew them better than to know that was true. The bats knew him better too. Deserts, the jungle, abandoned warehouses, rafters, Prue listed off as she slid gloves onto her hands while stopped at the other's side, neither of the 2 moving aside from that even as the other 3 assassins waited on them with varying degrees of annoyance and fondness in their gazes, a detail that the bats did not miss even as they watched the pair with wide eyes. You send me to all of the nicest places, boss, the assassin finished, everything but the title itself drenched in sarcasm. As they left for the shadows. The respect behind the title was real though. The respect that the assassin held for Tim was true. Why am I here, Roz? Red Robin asks as he walks forwards towards the 3 assassins, finally acting as if they were in the room with him. At the same time, Prue joins the bats up in the rafters. The Gotham vigilantes found themselves more hearing than seeing the sniper rifle that the assassin assembles once she had found a place near Cass, going to the girl as if Prue had been told that she would be safest among them with her. She was right. Cass may not like the intent of the weapon that the girl held, but anyone under Tim's trusted command would be safest at her side. No one knew how to feel about Tim showing up with an assassin at his side, one that some had never seen before, and those that hadn't known that he was still in contact with to this day. They knew even less how to feel about Tim addressing the demon's head so informally and with enough attitude that his head should have been on a chopping block long ago. They did know one thing though, this meeting would not be a boring one. You could at least greet me properly first, detective, the demon's head says as the teen settles among the 3 assassins, as if he was joining their ranks. The name sends a ripple of unease through the bats as they hear it given so casually to the bird, their bird, down below. It was never a good thing to be acknowledged by Ra's al Ghul, Bruce and Dick could say that easily enough. It was a lesson that Damien was still learning. Bruce's jaw goes tight as he watches from the rafters as Red Robin walks closer to the eldest al Ghul, something protective rising up within the man's chest as he watches as Ra's grabs the back of his son's head, bringing Tim's forehead to his own. That feeling has nothing on the way that Tim's skin crawls at the contact for the few moments that he is held much too close. When he goes to pull away, Tim finds the hand resting on the back of his head drifting to cup the side of face like one would a lover, or a favored child. It was a strange move, but not an overly uncommon one given the sort of greeting that it was. Ra's thumb drifting to graze Tim's bottom lip though decided which direction the touch had wandered towards, and the teen decided that it was a step too far. The Red Hood watched with fingers tied around his gun as the eldest Ghul touched his little brother in a manner much too intimate for a man of his age. It was the sort of touch that would have already landed the perpetrator with a bullet adorning the space between their eyes had it occurred on the street. It was the sort of touch that left Jason feeling nauseous as he watched and could do nothing as both Dick and Bruce held him back even as they hardly looked any better themselves. None of the bats did. That was their brother, their son, the vigilante that they fought alongside each night, and he was down there with a monster that he seemingly knew all too well. The assassin that Tim had brought him seemed to be one of the few taking the scene worse than he was. The woman had her rifle trained down below with an aim that was sure to end in a death that not even the pits would have the time to revive before it was too late if Ra's al Ghul made another misstep. Cass, the only bat other than Bruce that seemed to hate killing to a high extent, didn't seem inclined at all to stop the assassin. If Jason had to guess, she almost looked approving of the aim that had been set. The scene only became worse though as they watched as Tim seemed to soften under the contact, leaning into for a moment with a smile on the lips that the ancient man was still touching. A sick sight to see for them all, but one that was almost worth it as Tim's head suddenly dipped down just a bit before rearing back with blood-stained lips. Red Robin had bitten the thumb of the demon's head clean off. The bats were starting to understand why they had been called in to moderate the meeting, as it seemed to be for more reasons than just revealing the secrets of the bird below. Tim spit out the offending object that had been in his mouth into his gloved palm as the tang of blood and flesh filled his mouth. He wondered for a moment how many vitamins and shit he was going to need to take to counteract whatever the fuck he had just introduced to his system, but at that moment he didn't care in the least. He couldn't even bring himself to care of what the bats watching from above would think of the scene that they had just seen. All he cared about was the vindication that came with seeing the older man's brows pinched together in a subtle show of pain that was more than most ever got out of the man and lived to tell the tale of. All he cared about was bringing vindication to the child that had been chained to a wall, his suit unzipped. And suddenly words were pouring out of his mouth that he had never meant to say with an audience watching. "You lost the right to touch me, Roz, when you sent your sister to assault and murder me, and leave my body to rot in the catacombs of Paris just so you could have an heir." The effect was immediate throughout the room. Without even looking up, Tim could tell that up in the rafters, whoever had been tasked with reining in Hood had likely let the man go. Whether with ill intent towards the assassin before him, or out of a cool wash of horror going down their spines, Tim did not know, and at that moment he didn't care. Prue's aim remained just as lethal, but far more painfully so. And Cass, she had likely drawn in on herself then, never having wanted to be reminded of the day that she'd had to save down in the place where bodies were meant to rot. Tim didn't blame her, he had never wanted to remember either. He didn't want to know what the others were thinking. Of the horror there, the hurt of having to find out through this, flashbacks to when something similar had happened to most of those above. He didn't want to think of the thoughts going through Damien's mind. For all his evil, Roz was still the boy's grandfather, and Damien had wanted his approval since he had been old enough to know that this was something that he would need to procure to survive into adulthood. He didn't want to look at the apathy that he was sure was in Talia's gaze right now, the woman having always hated her father's interest in him. Not because of the nature of it, but because of the threat that Tim posed to Damien because of it. He didn't want to look into the eyes of his first teacher and risk seeing disappointment there for having allowed himself to be placed in such a position in the first place. He wouldn't have, but that was something that only Lady Shiva would know now. He certainly didn't want to see the sort of pinched unapologeticness that Roz held in his eyes right then, the almost smugness for the violence of Tim's actions, and the uncaringness of the things that Tim had revealed, but standing before the man left him no choice but to see it. It didn't mean that he had to keep seeing it though. Those in the rafters watch as Tim turns then, turning his back on the demon's head without being excused, something that one didn't just do without losing their own head. But Tim kept his as his cape, heavy as it may be to aid with flight, swished with his movement like ruffled feathers. "I don't need this," the teen said, his voice angered as he moved to walk away. It was true, he didn't need to play whatever game Roz was currently at right then. There was nothing that he needed from the man, no civilians in the crosshairs, no companies at stake, nothing keeping him within the building other than Prue and the other bats, all of whom would be able to easily leave on their own even if he left right then. That thought process didn't seem to matter to the leader of the League of Assassins though, it almost never did. Dick almost growls, low and animalistic as he sees the older man reach out and grab his little brother's wrist, forcing the teen to turn. The only thing that stopped him was the speed in which Tim turned then, the movement of it all. The way that Tim brought his leg up with him and broke the man's arm. Tim felt the ancient bones break beneath him, pain coursing through his own form that he didn't care about in the least as he watched Roz draw his arm back to himself right then. He was under no impression that the man had not just let him inflict the damage that he just had done to him for whatever reason, but damn did it feel good to do so. He didn't even regret it when Talia moved to attack him for it, if anything that was a bonus. Tim had no misconceptions that he was the best fighter around, but he was the same teen that had trained under Lady Shiva, the same one that had been trained by bats, and the same one that had fought Ra's al Ghul, a man that could fight Batman to a standstill and had even held his own for a small while. For enough time for all of his plans to fall into place. So, when Talia al Ghul swung at him like a viper, he was prepared and met the strike with a grab of his own, using the force of the woman's own swing to bring them both to the ground and bring a blade to her throat, blood trickling down the tanned skin. You could learn some lessons about touching as well, Al Ghul, Tim said, trailing the blade from the woman's throat up her face and leaving it to hover above her right eye. Talia seemed to know that Tim was just a bit more insane than he usually let on, because even as she seemed to internally rage, she held perfectly still beneath the teen's blade. She's not the only one that stills either. Most of the bats do as well, if they hadn't already done so after hearing the sickening crack of bone as Tim had attacked the demon's head, or when they had heard the words that he had said before. The scene down below now was just another tally in a score that they didn't know the number of because they hadn't known that there was a game being played till tonight. Bruce stilled even more as he watched his son take a blade to the mother of his child with a smile on his lips that the man thought might just put the Joker to shame. Damien stilled as he watched his mother bested by the very bird that she had told him to kill to ensure his place in the family. The one that seemed so unkillable no matter how much he had tried. And he had tried, even if Tim had not taken him all that seriously for it. He was starting to understand why. Jason stilled as he watched as his younger brother took a blade to the woman that had found him, taught him, healed him. The woman with whom he had. Talia. He didn't know how he felt about the scene below, but he thought that the words that Tim had just spoken might have been about him. He thought that he would be okay if they were, if the current action was because of him, for him. His mind had just been brought back by the pit then. And even if he would have been, at best, 19 that night, he had been dead for 6 months, and comatose ever since he came back. When the anger had finally faded, his skin had begun to crawl. Prue looked down at Tim and wondered why her dear boss seemed so damn intent on making nearly every assassin that he had ever met bleed even if most seemed to be well-deserved. She had lines that she didn't cross after all, it was why she found herself fighting alongside Red Robin these days instead of against him, but it was causing her blood pressure to spike. Something that wasn't helped as Lady Shiva herself stepped towards the pair on the ground. Prue shifted her aim. Cass watched her mother and wondered what she would do. Timothy, Lady Shiva says, her voice sounding in a manner that most within the room had never heard before, almost something akin to soft if it had not been her speaking it. For whatever reason, those in the warehouse watch as Red Robin seems to relax as his given name is called by one of the world's greatest fighters. Do draw away from her now, dear student. Cass bit down a jerk as she heard the term of endearment that her mother used for her little brother. An action that she had not known the cold woman capable of till now, not truly. She watches as her mother walks towards the pair, holding out a hand to the teen. Watches as her little brother looks up at her mother, eyes hidden behind the mask, but form pensive, as if deciding whether to listen now or in a bit. The words that flow out of Tim's mouth are answer enough before he ever moves. Of course, teacher, Tim says as he pulls the blade away with one hand and takes his teacher's outstretched hand with the other, letting the older fighter pull him to his feet. When the pair face each other for the first time in too long, Lady Shiva reaches out slowly with one hand and grabs the back of the younger's neck, pulling the teen in close and placing her forehead against Tim's own, much like how Roz had before. It's different this time though, as Tim's own hand reaches up and grabs the back of the other's neck as well, mirroring the greeting. It was a vulnerable one to use, one where you protected the other's neck, leaving your own bare if unreciprocated. Even if the motion was mirrored, you left your neck caught then, making it easy for the other to pull back and drive a blade through the front of it. It wasn't the sort of greeting that one used lightly, those up in the rafters with league backgrounds knew as much. Yet, the pair did so comfortably despite their history. Or maybe because of it. When Tim pulls away, Lady Shiva lets her touch linger, cupping the boy's face in the way a mother would her child's after not having seen them for some time, running her own thumb across the blood that had dried on the teen's skin, rubbing it away before letting her hand fall. She didn't acknowledge how Tim had leaned into the touch for just a moment, and neither did anyone else. When the legendary assassin pulls away, she procures 2 syringes from her person, each filled with a liquid that glowed a hazardous shade of green. Tim didn't need to be told what they held, nor what he was supposed to do with the one that he was handed as he turned towards Roz, Lady Shiva turning to where Talia had pulled herself up from the ground and held the man's thumb back out to him, blood staining his palms as if he had just killed a man with them. "Thank you, detective dear," the man says as he grabs the appendage and holds it in place as the teen carefully drops Lazarus water onto the bite, piecing the thumb back to the body of the demon's head. Tim doesn't look at or acknowledge the man, but when the time comes to heal the arm that Tim been allowed to break before, the teen stabs the syringe into the gut of the man in the manner that one would a blade. "Call me dear again and the next syringe goes in your throat," the teen threatens as he takes a step back. "I wouldn't make such threats as that, child," Talia Ghul warns, her throat now healed, but the evidence of blood still on her clothes. "You're lucky we have not told the Lady Shiva to kill you yet for the disrespect you have given," she says as the woman in question walks back to Tim's side. Tim only smirks though, something that sets nearly everyone in the room on edge. "I've killed my dear teacher before," the teen says as if the confession that he had not only beaten the Lady Shiva in a fight before, but had also done so severely enough that the woman had needed to be revived did not leave everyone in the warehouse railing other than the pair themselves, so at least it would be an interesting fight. Talia went still at that, looking between the teacher and student as if expecting one of the pair to fess up to the teen's lie, only they couldn't as Tim had spoken the truth and Shiva felt pride at having died at the hand of her student. It was every teacher's dream to be bested by the pupil. She awaited the day that the child could do so without any sort of tricks, even if the drug had not been taken by the teen by choice. Bruce looked down at his third son, the one that he had never wanted to have but still loved all the same, and wondered when the teen had stained his hands with blood in such a manner. Wondered how he hadn't known. Though he didn't know how he could have when he had not even known that the boy had trained under the assassin till today. Tim wondered for a moment what the woman must think of him now as he stands before her, no longer the child that had chosen a bow staff because it was the least lethal of the options that she'd had at the time, and had refused to choose again. They had not seen one another since he was still in his original colors, back when he still thought becoming his evil future self was some wild future that would never come to pass. Now he was dressed in black and red and had the blood of hundreds, if not thousands, on his hands, and he hardly even cared. Besides, the teen continued, his smile much too sharp, even if I were to die by her hand, I likely wouldn't stay that way long if Roz truly needs me for something. Tim turned to look at the uncharacteristically silent man then and found a smirk on the man's lips that told the teen all that he needed to know. He was right. "Let me ask again," Tim says, still looking at the man, "why am I here? Can't I just want to expose each of the secrets that you like to hold so close to your chest, detective?" Roz asked, his voice a sort of sickly sweet that Tim knew better than to believe. Besides, if such a thing truly were the man's motive, then there would have been no need to drag his daughter into this. Nice try, Roz, but I know that even you wouldn't waste all of our time like this just for that," Tim says, his voice flat. From above, the bats watch as the bird down below reaches into one of the pockets on his belt, and pulls from within it something that makes all of their hearts stop for just a moment as Prue grins wide. A detonator. So, why don't we give the full answer now before I take all of the bases that I missed the first time around? The bats all looked at one another as if trying to see who among them had known of this before tonight, all of them coming up empty. Damien, Jason, and Cass had heard of the explosions of course, but none of them had known that it was Tim that had been responsible for them. None of the bats had known that he would go that far. Jason wondered for a moment if his little brother's kill count was now higher than his own. He knew that it must be since that explosion was rumored to have killed well into the thousands. Some bases were made to be tricky and winding on purpose, making them hard to escape quickly. Some bases had so many floors underground that even if there were no tricks, the building would still fall on you if you were on any of the lower levels, warning be damned. And it wasn't like it was a long warning either, though he knew that had to have been by design. Any longer and they would have been able to salvage things. Bruce looks down at his son, at the boy dressed in black and red, and knows that somewhere along the line he had failed. He didn't know if it was when he finally accepted the other as Robin, he didn't think that it was that, knew that Tim had been nothing short of a stubborn gift back then, keeping him from doing something drastic, but he thought that it might have been far too many of the days that followed, a birthday present that he never should have given the teen comes to mind. There was only so much that one could be put through before they break. And Tim had killed far too many to be whole. Ra's al Ghul laughs then, cold and cruel and amused in a way that so many lives on the line should not make him so. The Council of Spiders have come to Gotham, the demon's head says, his voice dropping into something more business-like as he does so. It was a tone that made many of those in the room unsettled. The words, though, seemed to make the teen below all but light up. Tim smirks, his hand falling to his side, and the detonator back into his utility belt as if he had never threatened mass murder at all. Why didn't you just start with that? Lady Shiva watches with amusement as her pupil's entire demeanor changes then, going from murderous to frighteningly joyful as he smiled at the eldest al Ghul and thanked the man for procuring him a whiteboard for all of this, as he grabbed one of the markers there. The only person that she had ever seen switch emotions so fast was the older man himself, and he seemed to be just as pleased as the boy now was. The bats were just a bit terrified though as they watched the third Robin switch like that. Steph had always known that Tim was good at lying, he was the only one among them that could lie to Batman after all, and get away with it, but she didn't think that the glee that the younger teen was showing was a lie at all. I've had Prue tracking them in Africa since they escaped the rubble, Tim says as he opens one of the markers and draws a circle at the top of the board. And why would you do that, little hero? Talia asked, saying the title as if it burned like acid on her tongue. Tim wouldn't mind removing it from her mouth if it hurt too much, in the spirit of cooperation and all. Tim sneers. Because they killed two of my friends out in that desert, and caused Prue to lose her larynx and me my spleen, the teen reminds her, cold and cruel with his words. If I had it my way their heads would all be on pikes, but your father would just use them for cloning purposes then, so the bodies will have to be completely destroyed. Good thing Gotham is known for its bats of acid then. Talia raised a brow, considering the child before her. The child with whom her father had entrusted more than one group of his men to. The child that had gotten those men killed because one of the men that Ra's had assigned to watch him had been a spy for the very people that the child had been seeking to stop. It seemed that the boy truly did want revenge for the two friends that he had been given. Seemed that Woods did too. All right then, the woman said, and what have you learned, Red Robin? Tim smiled then, sharp as a blade. They're shifting their focus from assassins to heroes. Then why come to Gotham and not go after the smiley blue one? Lady Shiva asked, intentionally miss. Naming the super that she knew her boy did not like since the clone had come along, and especially since the time after the bats assumed death. Because most people don't jump from mortal assassins to aliens, Tim answered, drawing another circle towards the bottom of the board, down below the first. In the first circle the teen wrote assassins, and in the second he wrote metas and supers. In the middle of the two the teen wrote bats. They find some middle ground first. Which is why they're in Gotham. So they're hunting you and your family now? Talia asks, though Tim knows what the other is truly asking. Not exactly, the teen answers. They likely won't come after me again if they've truly moved on from assassins, not when the last time that they saw me, in their eyes, I was a League assassin protecting the cradle with my life. No, they'll hunt down Hood, Robin, and Black Bat first and then branch out to the rest of the bats. Because they are League trained, Roz said, nodding approvingly as he had already put this together, much as Tim had. Even spiders find comfort in the familiar, it seems, Talia supposed, though there was something tight in the creases of her eyes now that she knew that her son was in danger. So, we'll use one for bait and lock the other two away tight. Bottleneck them, Tim says, though as he does so he's not looking at any of the three assassins, but up into the rafters between the elder of the two mentioned bats. All three of the targets look ready to maim anyone that threatens them next. Those who threaten their family and friends next. Tim wondered if he was still included on that list. He hoped that he was. You'd risk their lives, detective? Roz asked, looking at the boy appraisingly. Their lives are already at risk, Tim refutes, you and I both know this, or else you wouldn't be here trying to save the lives of nearly everyone you've ever considered a potential heir. And wasn't that something to know that the bats filled so much of that list? Come now, dear student, Lady Shiva says, laying a hand on the boy's shoulder, let us spar now. I have not fought you since you wore your original colors, and I heard that you were the one to speak to about when it comes to fighting the council. We can talk strategy while we are at it. He has been one of 3 to survive them, and one of the 2 to ever survive 2 encounters. We can have Prue joins us then, the teen offers, and as he does the woman in question appears at his side with a too wide smile on her lips, the woman seemingly itching for a fight. She was with me for both encounters with the council. And I'm going to be there for the final one too, the girl says as if that was not already a given. All right then, Lady Shiva Agris, let us go, little fighters. The bats could only watch as the 3 assassins left, leaving the demon's head and Talia al Ghul behind. Because it was 3 right then. None of the bats chased after Tim right then, they were all too busy wondering how well they knew the teen at all. There were a lot of things that one could do to earn the red in their names. They could be the loners of the family. They could stain their hands with blood. But one thing that each of the Reds had in common was their fall from grace. The Reds were flightless birds, ones that had to build their own wings once they walked back home. Tim had fallen from grace for a long while now, and it was only now that they were learning of the wings that had long since burned.